My daughter-in-law's mother sold her wedding ring to pay for my blood pressure medicine, and I didn't even find out until 3 weeks later. But that same week, my own son handed his father-in-law the keys to a $40,000 boat as a birthday gift and told me, his own father, that he didn't have $22 to spare for the pills that were keeping my heart beating on schedule. Let me say that again, because I still have trouble believing it myself. My son bought another man a boat, and he told me he couldn't afford $22. I'm not a bitter man by nature. I want you to know that before I tell you the rest of this, because what I'm about to say might make me sound like one. I spent 38 years as a machinist at a tool and die shop outside Youngstown, Ohio. My hands still carry the nicks and the calluses, even now, 5 years into retirement. I never made much money, but I never once, not one single time in my life, told my son Michael that I couldn't afford to help him when he needed it. Not when he needed cleats for Pop Warner football. Not when he needed a suit for his junior prom. Not when he needed $400 to fix the transmission on his first car so he wouldn't lose the delivery job that was paying for his own gas money. I found it. I always found it. First, I picked up weekend shifts. I skipped my own doctor's appointments. Plus, I drove a truck with a garbage bag duct taped over a broken back window for 2 winters so that Michael would never once feel what it was like to go without. His mother, Diane, passed when Michael was 11. Cancer. Fast, cruel. The kind that doesn't give you time to say the things you meant to say. After that, it was just the 2 of us in a little rental house on Force Avenue. And I want to tell you, raising a boy alone while working 60 hours a week is its own kind of education. Nobody teaches you how to braid nothing into something. You just do it because there's no one else standing there to do it for you. I coached his little league team even though I didn't know the rules half the time. I learned to make spaghetti 7 different ways because it was the one thing he'd eat without complaining. I sat up with him the night before his SATs because he was too nervous to sleep, and I didn't sleep either. Not because I was worried about the test, but because I didn't want him waking up alone in that house feeling like nobody in the world cared whether he passed or failed. He got into Ohio State. First one in our family to go to college at all, let alone a school like that. I remember standing in the parking lot the day we moved him into his dorm, and I remember thinking, this is it, this is what all of it was for. Every double shift, every skipped vacation, every Christmas where I told him Santa was tight on cash that year so he wouldn't ask why we didn't have what the other kids had. It was all leading to this moment, watching him carry a box of his own books into a building I never could have imagined stepping into myself. That's where he met Rachel. Rachel Whitfield. First. Her family had money, real money, the kind that doesn't announce itself loudly, but you can feel it in the way people carry themselves, in the ease of it. Her father, Gerald Whitfield, owned 3 car dealerships across 2 counties. Her mother, Susan, did some kind of non-profit board work, the kind where you get your photo taken next to a check with a lot of zeros on it. The first time Michael brought Rachel home to meet me, I remember scrubbing the kitchen counter 3 times because I was terrified she'd think less of him for where he came from. She was polite, kind, even, in a distant sort of way. But I saw the way her eyes moved across my living room, the second-hand recliner, the television I'd bought at a pawn shop, and I understood, the way a man understands weather in his knees before a storm, that I was a problem to be managed. Not a person, a problem. Michael married Rachel 4 years after graduation. Beautiful wedding, out at a vineyard in the Hocking Hills, the kind of place where the flowers alone probably cost more than I made in a month back at the shop. I sat at a table near the back with some second cousins of Rachel's I'd never met, and I watched my son dance with his new father-in-law, and something in my chest went quiet and cold in a way I didn't have a name for yet. For a few years, things were fine. Not close, but fine. Michael called on Sundays. He and Rachel had a little girl, Emma, and God, that child became the whole center of my world the second I held her. I babysat when they'd let me, which wasn't often, because Gerald and Susan had a lake house and a pool and a golden retriever and every advantage a grandparent with a bad hip and a 2-bedroom rental could never compete with. But I never made it a competition. I just wanted my time with her. I'd take her to the little diner on Route 9 and let her order pancakes even at dinner time, and she'd laugh so hard sometimes she'd get the hiccups, and I would have crawled across broken glass for another hour of that laugh. But slowly, the way ice slowly stops being ice and starts being water without you ever seeing the exact moment it happens, things changed. The Sunday calls became Sunday texts. Then the texts became less frequent too. Michael got a promotion at the insurance firm where he worked, something Gerald had helped arrange through a golf buddy, and after that, it seemed like every conversation we had was about his new title, his new office, his new car. He never asked about my knees anymore, even though I'd mentioned the arthritis more than once. He never asked if I was eating right or if the roof I'd been patching myself was finally going to give out on me. It was always him, his life, his success. And somewhere in there, without me ever quite noticing the turn, he started calling Gerald Dad at family gatherings. The first time I heard it, we were all at Thanksgiving, and Michael turned to Gerald and said, "Dad, you want another beer?" So easily, so naturally, like he'd been saying it his whole life. I sat there with a fork halfway to my mouth, and I felt something in me crack that has never, to this day, fully healed. I had been dad for 31 years. I earned that word one double shift at a time. Gerald had never once stayed up all night with a feverish child. He'd never worked a callus onto his hand in his life. But he had money, and apparently, in my son's eyes, that was a kind of fatherhood too, maybe even a better kind. I never said anything. I told myself I was being an old fool, that I was jealous of a man who could give my son things I never could. I told myself that love wasn't supposed to be a competition and that Michael was allowed to have more than one man in his life who mattered to him. I smiled through every holiday. I held my granddaughter and let her fall asleep on my shoulder and told myself that was enough, that it had to be enough. About 14 months ago, I started having chest pains. Sharp ones. The kind that make you stop mid-sentence and grip the edge of a table. My doctor, a good man named Dr. 18, Okafor, who'd been seeing me since before Diane passed, ran the tests and sat me down and told me I had a condition called atrial fibrillation, an irregular heartbeat that, left untreated, could throw a clot straight to my brain. He put me on a blood thinner and a beta blocker, and he told me, in that calm, careful voice doctors use when they don't want to scare you but need you to understand the stakes, that missing doses wasn't something I could afford to do. Not once. Not for a single day. The blood thinner alone, even with my Medicare coverage, ran me $22 a month after the copay. $22. Less than what Michael probably spent on a single round of golf with Gerald on a Saturday morning. I want you to sit with that number for a second the way I had to sit with it, because everything that follows only makes sense once you understand how small that number really was, and how impossible it became anyway. My pension from the tool and die shop wasn't much to begin with, and after the company got bought out twice in the years after I retired, what little I had left shrank further. Between rent, the electric bill, and food, I was cutting things close every single month. I stopped buying meat except on Sundays. I turned my thermostat down to 62 in the winter and wore 2 sweatshirts around the house instead. I was managing. Barely, but I was managing, because I had that pill bottle. And as long as I had that pill bottle, I told myself I was going to be around long enough to walk Emma down the aisle someday. Long enough to see whatever came next. Then my pension check got tangled up in some kind of processing error at the bank, a mess that took nearly 3 weeks to untangle, and I found myself, on a Tuesday afternoon, standing in my kitchen with $19.40 to my name and an empty pill bottle rattling like a maraca when I shook it. I want you to know I have never in my life asked my son for a dime since the day I helped move him into that dorm room. Not once. I was too proud, and if I'm honest, I was scared too. Scared of what it might mean about the kind of relationship we'd become if I asked and he said no. But this wasn't pride anymore. This was my heart. So I picked up the phone. He answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear noise behind him, some kind of restaurant or bar, glasses clinking, someone laughing. "Hey, Dad, what's up? I'm actually out with Gerald. Can I call you back?" "It's quick, son, I promise. I hate to even bring this up." I felt my throat tighten around the words. My check got held up at the bank, some kind of error, and I'm out of my heart medicine. It's just $22. I'll pay you back the second the check clears. I swear it. There was a pause, not a short one. Long enough that I heard the restaurant noise swell and fade behind him. Long enough that I started to wonder if the call had dropped. "Dad." He said it slow, the way you'd talk someone down off a ledge. "Things are just really tight for us right now. Rachel and I just refinanced, and with Emma's tuition at the new school, I really don't have anything extra this month. I'm sorry. It's $22. Michael. And. My voice cracked on his name in a way I hated, in a way I hadn't let it crack in front of him since Diane's funeral. It's for my heart. I know, and I feel bad, but I've got to think about my family right now. Rachel and I had a whole budget conversation about this exact kind of thing. Pop, my family. Two words that landed on me like a physical weight, because somewhere along the way, without a single conversation, without a single moment I could point to, I had stopped being included in that phrase. I was the man who raised him alone after his mother died, who worked 60-hour weeks so he'd never feel poor, and I had become, in his mouth, someone outside the boundary of family. Okay, I said, because what else was there to say? I understand. I'm sorry I bothered you. You're not a bother, Dad. I'll call you this weekend. And then he was gone, back into the noise of wherever he was, and I stood in my kitchen holding a phone that still had a crack running through the screen from when I dropped it 2 winters ago, and I felt something in my chest that had nothing to do with the arrhythmia. That night I did something Dr. Okafor had warned me never to do. I took a paring knife and split what pills I had left, 3 of them, right down the middle, figuring half a dose stretched over twice as many days was better than none at all. I knew it wasn't right. I knew it wasn't safe. But I didn't know what else to do, and pride is a strange, stubborn thing that keeps a man from picking up the phone a second time even when picking up the phone might save his life. 3 days later, I was sitting in my recliner scrolling through Facebook on the tablet Michael had given me 2 Christmases ago, mostly out of habit, mostly because there wasn't much else to do in the evenings anymore. And that's when I saw it, a photo posted by Susan Whitfield, a gleaming white pontoon boat, brand new, the kind with the leather captain's chairs and the built-in sound system, tied up at a dock somewhere on a lake I didn't recognize. The caption read, "Gerald's 60th birthday surprise, courtesy of our incredible son-in-law Michael. He said Dad deserved to enjoy his retirement in style. We are so blessed by this family." I sat there for a long time just staring at that photo, zooming in on it with 2 fingers the way Emma had taught me to do, looking at the price tag someone had helpfully mentioned in the comments. $41,000. $41,000 for a boat for a man who already had a lake house, a boathouse, and 3 car dealerships full of vehicles he could have taken for free. And 3 days before that, my own son had told me he didn't have $22 for the medicine keeping my heart from stopping. I didn't call him. I didn't send an angry text. I didn't post anything. I just sat in that recliner in the dark for a long time, feeling something colder and heavier than anger settle into my bones, something closer to grief. I had spent 31 years believing that what I gave my son, the sacrifice, the sleepless nights, the meals I skipped so he could eat, had built something permanent between us. And in that moment I understood that somewhere along the way, all of it had been quietly, silently, replaced. And the following week I was down to my last $3 and completely out of medication, splitting nothing because there was nothing left to split. I walked to the pharmacy on Elm, the one where I'd been filling prescriptions for going on 15 years, and I stood at the counter and I told the pharmacist, a young woman named Priya who always remembered my name, that I needed to figure out a payment plan because I simply didn't have it that day. She looked at my chart, looked at me, and without a word, she went into the back and came out with a small blister pack of samples. "This'll get you through the week, Mr. Kowalski. Don't you worry about it." I thanked her more times than was probably necessary, and I walked home in the cold, feeling like a man who had failed at the one job that mattered most, which was simply staying alive for the people who still needed him. It was a Thursday, raining sideways the way it does in Ohio in early spring when I heard a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most of my old coworkers from the shop had moved south or passed on, and my brother Walt lived 4 hours away in Erie and rarely made the trip anymore. I figured it was someone selling something, or the landlord finally coming about the gutter that had been hanging loose since October. I opened the door, and there stood Gerald Whitfield, soaked through his golf jacket, no umbrella, holding a leather folder against his chest like it might dissolve in the rain. "Walter," he said, and it struck me, hearing him use my first name, because in 6 years of family gatherings, Gerald Whitfield had never once called me anything but a nod and a tight smile. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. My little house was a mess, dishes in the sink, mail piled on the table I hadn't had the heart to sort through. I cleared a stack of unopened envelopes off a chair and told him to sit, and I apologized for the state of the place, an apology I hated myself for making even as the words left my mouth, because why should a man apologize in his own home? Gerald sat down and set the leather folder on the table between us, and for a moment he just looked around, at the water stains spreading across my ceiling, at the pill bottle sitting empty on the counter, at the stack of unpaid bills I hadn't managed to hide in time. His face did something complicated then, something I couldn't quite name. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Something I should have figured out a long time ago." I braced myself. I assumed he was there to tell me Michael and Rachel were moving, taking Emma somewhere far enough that Sunday diner trips would become a memory. "Michael told me you refused to help pay for Emma's private school tuition," Gerald said. "He told Rachel and me, months ago, that you'd come into some money after your retirement buyout, and that you just didn't want to spend it on your granddaughter. That's the story we've been told for over a year, Walter. That you had money, and you were choosing not to help." The words hit me like ice water. I hadn't come into anything after retirement. My buyout had been $11,000, and it had gone, every cent of it, toward paying off the medical bills that piled up in Diane's final year. Debts I'd still been paying down slowly even now, more than 2 decades later. "I don't have any money, Gerald," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I never did. I've been living on my pension, and whatever I can scrape together. I know that now." He opened the folder with hands that weren't quite steady. "I took the boat in for a hitch installation last week, and while I was waiting, I got a call from my finance guy about a discrepancy on the loan paperwork. So I went digging. Michael didn't pay cash for that boat, Walter. He financed it, and he didn't finance $41,000. He financed $63,000, at an interest rate that's going to have him paying on that boat for the next 9 years. He slid a paper across the table, and I looked at my son's signature at the bottom of a loan agreement that made my stomach turn over. He's drowning," Gerald continued. "Credit cards, the refinance on the house, now this. And he's been telling us for a year that you were sitting on money and refusing to help your own grandchild so that Susan and I would keep covering things without asking questions. So that nobody would ask him where his money was actually going. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just sat there with that loan document trembling slightly in my hands, feeling something between vindication and a grief so total it had nowhere to go." Gerald's eyes moved back to the empty pill bottle on my counter. "What's that?" "Heart medication," I said. "I ran out. Money got tight this month." I watched the color drain from his face. He stood up so fast his chair scraped hard against the floor, walked to the folder, and pulled out an envelope thick with cash that he pressed into my hands before I could even think to refuse it. "Get to the pharmacy tonight," he said, his voice rough. "Get whatever you need, groceries too. And Walter, I am going to fix this. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to fix this." Over the next hour, sitting in my cramped little kitchen with the rain still hammering the roof, Gerald told me everything. Michael had been quietly draining accounts for over a year to fund a lifestyle he couldn't sustain on his own, propped up by a story about a stingy, wealthy father who wouldn't help. Gerald told me he intended to call the bank about restructuring the boat loan into his own name to stop the bleeding for Emma's sake, and then he intended to sit Michael down, with Rachel and Susan present, and make him answer for every lie. "I need you there," Gerald said. "I need him to look you in the eye while he explains it." 2 weeks later, we sat around Michael and Rachel's dining room table, the same table where I'd once eaten Christmas dinner, and pretended not to notice how out of place my hand-me-down sweater looked against Rachel's family china. Gerald laid it all out, the loan documents, the pattern of withdrawals, the lie about my supposed inheritance. Rachel sat very still, her hands folded in her lap, and I watched something in her face go from confusion to a kind of quiet devastation as her father spoke. "Is this true?" She asked Michael, and her voice was barely a whisper. Michael's face had gone the color of old paper. He started to say it wasn't what it looked like, that he could explain, and I found myself speaking before I'd even decided to. "You had $22 for me, and you couldn't find it," I said, "but you found $63,000 for a boat for a man who already had everything. Don't you dare tell me it's not what it looks like." I know exactly what it looks like." He didn't have an answer for that. Nobody in that room did. Michael moved out 3 weeks later. His firm, it turned out, had also flagged some irregularities in expense reports he'd been submitting, small ones, but enough that combined with everything else, he lost his job within the month. Rachel filed for a legal separation and kept the house, kept primary custody of Emma. I started seeing my granddaughter more than I ever had before. Rachel would bring her by on Saturdays, and we'd sit at my kitchen table, the same one that used to be stacked with unpaid bills, now cleared and steady, and she'd draw pictures of the two of us fishing, even though we'd never once actually gone fishing together. Gerald made sure of things quietly, groceries appearing, a new furnace installed before winter hit, though he never once called it charity, and I never once called it that either. We called it what it was, two men who'd both been lied to by someone we loved, finding some strange, unexpected steadiness in each other. One evening in early autumn, I was sitting on my porch when a car pulled up that I recognized. Michael got out slowly. He looked thin, unshaven, nothing like the confident young man who used to talk about quarterly projections at Thanksgiving dinner. "Dad," he said, standing at the bottom of my steps like he wasn't sure he had the right to come further. I didn't get up. "I lost everything," he said, and his voice cracked in a way I hadn't heard since he was a boy waking from a nightmare. "Rachel won't talk to me. Gerald won't return my calls. I don't have anywhere else to go. What do you want from me?" "Michael, I don't know. Forgiveness, maybe. Help." I looked at him for a long time, this man who used to fall asleep against my shoulder in a beat-up recliner while I read him stories he'd already memorized by heart. I thought about all the years I stretched myself thin so he'd never feel poor, and how none of that had taught him what I most wanted him to learn. "I can't give you money, son. I don't have much, and what I do have, I need for myself now." I stood, my knees aching the way they always do these days. "But I'll tell you the same thing I told you when you were 7 years old and you lied about breaking Mrs. Halloran's window. Telling the truth is the only thing that ever actually fixes anything. Everything else is just delay." He cried on my porch steps that evening, and I let him, but I didn't invite him inside. I went in myself, and I closed the door, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept the whole night through. It's been almost a year now. Michael is working construction, paying down debt that will probably take him a decade to clear. And clear. Topic. He calls most Sundays, and it's different now, quieter, less about accomplishments and more about actual living, how the job's going, how he's trying to be better with Emma during his visitation weekends. I let him talk. I don't fully trust him yet, and I've told him as much, plainly, the way I've always tried to say things to him. Trust, I've learned at 64 years old, isn't something you hand back over just because someone says sorry with tears in their eyes. It's something rebuilt one honest year at a time, if it gets rebuilt at all. Gerald and I have dinner most Wednesdays now, an odd friendship neither of us saw coming, built out of the wreckage of a lie we'd both been living inside without knowing it. Last month he asked if I wanted to come out on a little 14-foot fishing boat he'd bought secondhand for practically nothing, said it did the job just fine, no leather seats required. I told him I'd like that. I take my medication every single day now, right on schedule, $22 a month, and I've started keeping a small emergency fund in a coffee can in my cupboard, just in case, because I never again want to find myself cutting a pill in half and hoping it's enough to keep my heart beating until someone remembers I exist. I learned this year that love was never supposed to be measured in dollar amounts, mine or anyone else's. But I also learned that a man has to know his own worth well enough to walk away from anyone, even his own blood, who has forgotten it. The truest gift I gave my son wasn't the sacrifice I made raising him alone. It was finally, at 64 years old, learning to close a door.